So in this demonstration, we're going to look at using Dexy with LaTeX, and the particular example we're going to look at is making some business cards using LaTeX. So first of all, let's just look at a standalone LaTeX file. And when we open this LaTeX file, we'll see just the usual document class declaration. And here we have some custom settings which set the page size on the margin to be a business card. And these business cards are actually designed to fit Moo's larger business card size. So we call a couple of packages. We want Graphic X, we want the color package, and we're going to want the fancy verbatim package in a minute. We then have a begin document statement. And then after the begin document statement, we have a page color setting, which is going to just set the background color for our page. And basically the text we're going to use here is just simply to say hello world. So that's all. So this is just a totally plain vanilla LaTeX document. And we're going to run this just using the PDF LaTeX command. And we can open the PDF file that results, and we can see we have the gray background we specified and just hello world with our text. So we can go in and we can modify this. So I'll just go and just change the exclamation marks. We can run PDF LaTeX again, and we can open it again, and we see now we have the exclamation marks. So we're not using Dexy at all here. This is just a plain LaTeX file. So let's move on now and start using LaTeX. And we're in a file now where we have, we're in a directory now where we have a couple of new files. We have a underscore footer, underscore header, and then we have a card.tex. So let's just look at the header file first. And what you can see is we have all the same elements we had before up to the point where we've defined the page color. And in the footer file, we just have an end document. So basically this header and footer file is going to sort of bookend the contents of what we'd like in our card. And we can open this card.tex file, and we can see here that we just have this hello world statement again. So what we're doing here is we're setting up a situation where we can have the header and footer defined once, then just focus on the contents of the business card in the LaTeX file. So let's just look at the Dexy configuration and see how this is set up. So what we have is we're just going to process the single file, card.tex, which is the file we saw a minute ago. And we're going to run that through a couple of different filters. So we have a filter whose alias is HG, we have a filter whose alias is FT, and then we have a filter called LaTeX. And the HG and FT refer to a header and a footer handler, header and footer filter. And let's just look at some of the source code for that. So we can see here the description says that the footer handler adds a footer to a file. And the way it adds a footer to a file is it's going to look for a file with the name underscore footer with the same extension as the file that we're running it with. So going back to our Dexy file, we can see that our file has an extension of TEX, and that means that the header and footer, and they both work in the same way, are going to look for underscore header.tex and underscore footer.tex, which is what we have. Now, in order for them to find those files, they can't just be in the directory, they actually have to be set as inputs. So you can either do this here by naming them explicitly, or you can do them with the all inputs as true statement and make sure that they're called somewhere else. And we'll see that syntax in a minute, but this way works just fine. So what we're doing here is we're going to say inputs to this LaTeX, to this file, are going to be underscore header.tex and underscore footer.tex. Now in this case, you can use pretty much any additional filters after you want. So if you want to do some processing on the header and footer files, for example, if you want to run them through Jinja to do some substitutions or anything else, you're welcome to do that. If you're not sure what else to do, you can just, if you don't need to do anything else, you can just use the Dexy filter, which is sort of a dummy filter within Dexy that doesn't actually change the file in any way, but it's just useful when you need to specify a filter and you don't have another one that you'd like to put there. So we have the two inputs, and as we saw a minute ago, when we looked at what was in these files, they basically define the header file basically defines everything you would need above the contents of the contents you're actually interested in. So this has all the LaTeX preamble and everything else we need, and it also starts the document and sets the background color. And the footer is going to go at the end of the document, as you'd expect, and all we have to do there in this case is to put in an end document. So that's the header and footer. And then finally, after that, we have the LaTeX filter, which is actually going to run LaTeX and generate a PDF. Okay, so we can, again, look at the structure, what we have here. We have the .dexy file, which tells Dexy what to do. We have the footer and header files. We have some of the Dexy directories, the artifacts, cache, and logs directory, and we have the card.tex. Which is the actual content. So just to remind you, I'll just type out the contents of that. We just have hello world with 2 exclamation marks. So I can now run Dexy. And when I run Dexy, it's going to process the results of that file. And then I can look, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call up the logs directory. In fact, I'm just going to do this again, just to avoid us having any confusion. I'm just going to call Dexy again, having removed the log directory, so we can just see the logs from this one run. So the Dexy log file has a lot of really useful debugging information, and it's definitely worth looking at. So it'll tell you what directories it's working on, and then it will tell you what filters it's loading and if there's any problems with filters. So there's a lot of really useful information here. So we can see at the beginning that the recurse option, so at the top there we have running Dexy with recurse. We can see that we skip some of the standard directories that we're going to generally skip. And then we start to list all the filters that are available. So you can see the ASCII.doc filter, and this works based on, it goes through each of the Python files that define these filters in turn, and then it goes through each of the filters defined in each of those files. So you can look through this anytime you run Dexy, and it gives you information. So what will be particularly useful to you is if you see any error messages there, because that will indicate perhaps why a certain filter wasn't available to you. So now we're getting into the actual useful information of the run. We can see here that we have, we can see here which of the Dexy configuration files we're loading. We can see this is the actual contents of the config file that we're loading. And now we're going to start getting into the itemized information that Dexy gives you as you're actually running Dexy. So we can see that we're in step 0 of a particular process, which is where we load the contents of this file into an artifact. We're then in the next step, which is where you apply the next filter. So in this case, we're just applying the Dexy filter. And as I said before, the Dexy filter doesn't actually change anything. It's just there if you need, it's just there sort of as a dummy filter. So the first file that gets processed is _footer.tex, and that just gets processed through the Dexy filter. Then we have the header.tex, and that gets processed, well, first of all, it just gets saved as an artifact, and then it'll get processed through the Dexy filter as well in step 1. So when you look at the log file, you'll see these steps, and you'll see then what files are holding the output. So if you need to get some information and debug what's going on, or if you're just curious about how each of the filters work and what they do, you can look in the artifacts directory, and you can actually get these files and open them up and inspect them, and you might find an error, or you might figure out why it's not working as expected, or you might, just be able to debug things at a more useful level. So in the log file, you'll see exactly which steps are written to which intermediate artifact files. So we're interested in the actual card.tex file getting processed through all those filters we defined. So here's the step 0 where we just save the LaTeX to its to an artifact file. We then have step 1, which is where we go through the header filter. So again, this is just going to append the contents of _header.tex. Then the footer filter. So again, you could look at this particular file and actually see how that works. So now we have some debugging information that's been written to the log file, which basically tells us which of the PDF LaTeX commands we're going to use and what command is going to be run. So this is actually the PDF LaTeX command, and this is the file it's going to be run on. So then we are back to our normal logging statements, and we see that the output file here is where the actual PDF, after we've run the LaTeX filter, which generates PDF from LaTeX, that's where the PDF file is actually stored. Okay, now we're at pretty much the end. So Dexy tells us that it's going to save these intermediate artifact files to the cache. So you can always get the files out of the artifacts directory, but and certainly if you need to trace down exactly which file was used in a particular step, the artifacts directory is going to be the more certainly it's the location record for all these files, and you can get that from the log. But Dexy also, as sort of a service, saves them to these nice canonical file names in the cache directory, which is generally where you're going to look for them. So we can see that the artifact containing the footer file gets written to this location in the cache, and the artifact containing the header file after going through the Dexy filter, gets written to this location. And then the one we're really interested in is the artifact containing the card contents after being put through the header and the footer and the LaTeX files gets saved to this location in the cache. So we can leave the log file now. So let's go ahead and open the card file. And we can see that it looks pretty much the same as it did before. The difference now is that we're doing this within the context of Dexy. So that means, well, first of all, we've separated out the header and footer into separate files, so we can reuse those. But it also means that we have access to all the other features of Dexy, so we can do things like incorporate code samples and run those code samples and pretty much anything else we'd like to do to make our cards more interesting.